Oh, as I said, I'm going to talk about soil preparation, and I'll show you my agenda now. Just a quick overview. And I'll start by moving on to the importance of good soil. An ideal vegetable garden is deep, well-drained, high in organic matter with good structure. So today I'm going to give basics. I'm not going to talk at all about the different elements of soil science. So I'll try to keep it basic, not doing deep dives, but suffice it to say, in the illustration on the right of a healthy tomato plant shows an extensive root system supporting that plant. And that root system needs a healthy environment for, if you're putting seed out directly, for germination, and then for growth and sturdiness and robustness against pests and weather. So to improve the soil, you can use a variety of soil amendments. Again, that these will improve the soil and help the plants survive stresses and thrive. And the stresses can include water, air, sun, and pests. So it's the soil contributes to a healthy plant. Doesn't eliminate all your problems, but it's the base that we start from. Also, it's a continuing process. You don't just do one shot of some amendment or compost or something. We're feeding the soil, and the soil, so to speak, is kind of consuming and developing from what we're putting in, to put it real generally. So few gardeners begin with good soil. And why is this? The soil can be compacted, sandy, a lot of clay, have nutrient deficiencies, lack of microorganisms, etc. So there's a lot of different things that you need to consider. So now we can go on to soil testing. So before you add anything, and this kind of goes from the assumption you've already got a bed, 4x8 bed, either in the ground or in a container, or if you're starting new, you should do a soil test before you invest a lot of time and effort in adding amendments or adding fertilizer. It can save time and money. And then based on the results of the test, you can target the problems that you need to address to improve the soil. Again, it's not going to be a one-time, one-shot solution. And these problems can be, like, as I said, nutrient deficiencies and pH, the soil pH. And as mentioned, you can, as part of the addressing your problems, add organic matter, other amendments, or fertilizer. So what is soil testing, and when should it be done, and how is it done? First thing to say, it's not complicated, depending on what you do. So I wouldn't be intimidated by it. The minimum recommended is, and here we're talking about vegetable gardening, but this would apply to your lawn or your landscape beds. So it's recommended every 3 years, or if you're starting a new bed, again, either you're particularly if you're digging into the ground to create a raised bed. Usually fall's the best time. Of course, it's spring now. Fall's recommended because you finished, the growing season's over, you can do a test and then see what you can add, particularly like organic matter or cover crop or something like that, kind of work it in before the winter begins. and then the bed is more ready in the spring. But it's still time to do it now. And again, recommended to do it before you start adding things, so that you're not adding things that you don't really need. You can get, where, what, how do I do this? A good garden center has a variety of test kits, and those can be specialized to just focus on one aspect, like pH. Those are okay. I actually used a pH kit that I got at a garden center, and I used it to get an indication if the pH was off because of a prior soil test showed some issues. And then based on that, I said, oh, I see some possible issues here based on the simple pH test. I got a Virginia Tech soil test and did a more thorough test. I mentioned here hire a private lab or contractor. That can be expensive. But if you're, for example, doing a large landscape project and have a good contractor that knows what they're doing, which isn't always the case, they should probably be talking about a soil test before they put a big planting in. So that's a time, maybe piggybacking on something else. If you're making a bigger investment, pay a company. Finally, there's the Virginia Tech soil test. That's what we recommend. They've got a sophisticated lab, and you mail it in. Those test kits are available. I've got a list, contact information in the resources list. Here's an example excerpt from a report I did. Again, don't be intimidated by this, but this looks at micronutrients or macronutrients and micronutrients. And I circled a couple, potassium and phosphate. I circled them because it showed I had very high. So that's an indication that I don't need to add those elements. And typically a mixed fertilizer would cover nitrogen and phosphates and potassium. And also circled the soil pH, which is 6.5 in this example. Another thing I'll flag on this chart to the far right in the table is organic matter. That doesn't have a value in it. That's an option when you order up a soil test. So based on this excerpt, you see the report gives you recommendations at the bottom. Moving on. Soil pH. This, as most of us know, is a measure of acidity and alkalinity in the soil. This is very important because if it's not right, can affect how a plant takes up nutrients from the soil. So it can affect the efficiency of that uptake. So it's a key thing to do before you make a big investment. Now, vegetables, narrowing it down to that, they vary in their nutrient and pH requirements. So it's something you should check or be aware of when you're buying your seeds or your plants. But typically they'll be in a pH range, kind of in the low acidity neutral range of 6.2 to 6.8. And you saw in the excerpt, I had a 6.5, so I was okay. Of course, if the results are out of the desired range, the test report will give you a recommendation. So if you need to increase the pH, be it your lawn or a landscape bed or your vegetable garden, the typical thing they would recommend is adding lime. Okay. I mentioned the phosphate and potassium or potash. Fertilizers we apply to improve, to supply nutrients to the soil, simply put. And the three main ones, again, are nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium. Now, there's also other things, other micronutrients, and you can see this on the, sorry, it's a little bit small, but there's the picture on the right with the guaranteed analysis shows the relative weights by volume of those nutrients in that example fertilizer. So the report may recommend that you need to adjust the improve or adjust the micronutrients. In my case, it said, whoa, you've got a lot of phosphate and potassium, P and K. You don't need to add that. That could do harm. Nitrogen isn't measured because it's transient in the soil, so it's kind of washes out or gets absorbed. But that's critical nitrogen fertilization for growth. But you don't want to overdo it. So fertilizers, there's lots of different types, granular, or sort of focused on tomatoes or particular plants, general purpose, and the forms can be granular or liquid. The examples I have on the right, the table is a granular, and it's an organic, and the fish emulsion, of course, is liquid. It gets mixed. Synthetic fertilizer, kind of all-purpose, might have higher volumes of the macronutrients. So you need to be careful, depending on your soil test, to not overdo it or underdo it. Understand what the condition of soil is before you pump a lot of nitrogen in, because that can give you growth spurts that hurt the plant or lead to plant burn. Okay, another thing to consider to improve the soil, amendments. So those can improve the physical properties of soil and create a better environment for the roots, as I mentioned earlier. Lime, I mentioned for the pH. Sand, which could help with drainage. Different types of manure, be it poultry or horse manure or cow manure, and leaf mold. You want to make sure you get, again, add things that will help what your issues are and help the soil health. But you want to get, particularly if you're getting like manures or leaf mold, you want to get good quality products. Because weed seeds can sometimes be a problem. So be careful if you're doing vegetable gardening or any gardening, that you know the source and characteristics of the product. I mentioned here compost and cover crops. Those are economical. In composting, there's vegetation-based, like yard waste or coffee grounds and whatnot. That can be bought commercially, or you can do it yourself, or animal-based, like you can get composted manure to add. So I mentioned, composting on your own is something to consider. Not a topic for this, but that has been something we've covered in the past and will do in the future. The cover crops or green manures are typically planted in the fall, and then they can be, so they get going growing, and then they're turned in the soil in the spring, and it provides organic materials and nutrients. This can be clover, peas, hairy vetch, alfalfa. A couple cover crops can be added in the spring for quick growth, or if you want to leave them in for a few months if you're not planning to use a bed. Okay. Okay, so here's a list of resources. We'll be posting this video online so that you don't need to transcribe all this. But most of these are Virginia Cooperative Extension publications. There's a wealth of information. And if you're considering the soil test, which I'd highly recommend if you've got a vegetable garden, you can see the forms that are involved. And then there's examples of the detailed notes that you might get depending on the recommendations. And I included a couple of things on composting as well. So there's a lot of material through Virginia Tech and other state extension services. Okay. So people, I'm sure, who are considering this, say, where do I get soil test kits? The library, you can read this yourself. And the tip here is, because of the situation with the pandemic, is to call ahead to make sure they have them, just to confirm that, and that they can accommodate the pickup either curbside or quick in and out. So that was it. I end by showing you pictures, some spring planting on the left, showing that I used raised beds and I mixed my own soil. And as you saw from my soil test, I overdid it a bit on a couple of macronutrients over time, but I'm having good results with the spring planting on the left. And then kind of deck container option with leaf lettuce on the right. So happy soil, happy plants.